Hi, my name's Rob. Welcome to the first video in a series I'm doing on grieving, dealing with grief, dealing with severe loss. I'm not exactly sure what the right title is, but I'm glad you're here. I've got a story to share with you. I'm out here in the San Juan National Forest. I'm looking up right over here through the trees at the hairpin turn on Wolf Creek Pass. I'm about 15 miles north of Pagosa Springs. The highway's just right over there. We'll no doubt be able to hear trucks running their Jake brakes as they come down the hill. Right over there is the San Juan River, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles. I'm out here in the woods a ways, although you're never really as far out in the woods as you think you are. So with any luck, we'll be able to be out here by ourselves and nobody will come wandering up on us. I don't want the story to get interrupted. There's a little campground right over there called West Fork Campground. 2 years ago, in July, my wife and I came up here to pick up two of our daughters. We have 3 daughters. Yeah, we have 3 daughters. The 2 youngest ones were on a backpacking trip up on the Continental Divide, a pretty tough backpacking trip. At the time, Aranza was, got to think it through, Aranza was 14 and Sarah was 12, I guess. Wow. I don't think that's right. No, Aranza was 16. I'm counting 2 years away. Sometimes it's hard to do the math on this, and I'm not even going to correct the mistakes by editing out the video. Aranza was 16, Sarah was 14. I'll tell you why I know that here in a minute. We came up here to pick them up here in the mountains of southern Colorado. My wife and me and my oldest daughter, Ella, who was 18, drove up here, spent a night in the campground, picked up our girls the next evening, got them rested up, brought them over to get showers, then camped out for another night, and then went up into the mountains of central Colorado up north of Breckenridge in the Eagle's Nest Wilderness and did about a 4 or 5 day backpacking trip. Nothing as severe, only about an 8-mile trip out there to where we went. Got to spend some good time doing that. Got finished with that, came back down into central New Mexico, met a couple of friends of ours, good family friends, who had kids that were all about the same age as my girls. Our kids had all grown up together, spent lots of time, spent most of their life around each other, pretty much spent all their life around each other. We went to church together, we did lots of things, lots of trips together, had loads of adventures from the time all the kids were little bitty. There's a spot there where we camped, down there at Jacks Creek Campground, north of Pecos, just on the edge of the Pecos Wilderness, where in 2009, my girls and I hiked off way into the woods, but they were pretty much little girls at that time, so it seemed way into the woods. And we carved their initials in the tree, and every year that we would go back there, which was not every year, but pretty much every other year we'd wind up there, we'd go take a picture again of them sitting in front of that tree, just to kind of watch how the tree aged and how my girls aged. We had a great trip. We cooked on the campfire, made YouTube videos, posted them. I'll put links to those in case you want to go see them. Then we went back home, where we were getting ready for Ella, the oldest one, to get ready to not go off to college, but go off to a school where she would learn to do a 1.5 years out in the mission field through one of the churches that we're associated with there in Lubbock. It's called the AIM program, AIM. It stands for Adventures in Mission. The night before this will be a hard story for me to tell in parts, but those of you who have suffered stuff will understand, I'm pretty sure. I know everybody will understand, so I won't even be very embarrassed. On a Wednesday, my girls went to Lubbock to church. The next day, on a Thursday, Ella was going to check into the dorm and get started on that mission program. I was at our motel. My wife was at our house. At the time, we didn't have anybody running our motel, so I was having to do it, be away from my family. Not very far away, just a few miles, but still not the same as being in the house with them, living at the motel. About 10 o'clock that evening, I got a call from my wife. She said the girls had been in an accident. She didn't give me any of the details. She said, I'm coming to get you. I got my shoes on, got a better shirt on. When you hear something like that, your hope is it's just some little stupid fender bender. She told me where the accident was, there at a town called Anton. There's an intersection there on the highway. Highway 84 runs from Lubbock to Clovis. It runs a lot further than that, but for our story, it runs from Lubbock, Texas to Clovis, New Mexico. It's a divided 4-lane highway. Some places divided by a long ways. You can park a semi-truck crossways between the lanes. My first thought was that somebody had pulled out at that intersection. And I knew that had the potential of being pretty bad. We jumped in the car and took off at a pretty high rate of speed and got to the scene of the accident even before all of the ambulances had gotten there. When we got there, there were crews on scene working. What had happened is a woman had pulled out in Littlefield, 12 miles away, and had driven on the wrong side of that divided highway the whole time, somehow not being able to figure out that she was in the wrong lane, with people honking at her, flashing their lights at her, all the signs and everything else being the wrong direction. There were people working frantically on the people at the scene, because what had happened is that woman ran head-on into my girls. When we first got out of the car and started to cross over to the accident, I could see my daughter's car. They had just gotten the top cut off of it at that point. The damage to the car was unimaginable. I could see my girls in the car. None of them were moving. And my initial thought was that I had lost all 3 of my girls. As we got closer, we realized that my youngest daughter, Sarah, in the back seat, was moving and conscious. And they had begun to work on getting her loose, but not to the point that my wife couldn't sit there and hold her hand and talk to her a little bit. My oldest daughter, Ella, was behind the steering wheel. She was dead at that point. It was obvious. My middle daughter, Aranza, was in the passenger seat in the front, and at that point was still alive. They got her out, and of course I could see the damage that had been done to her as they lifted her out of the seat. And my first thought was that there's no way you live through that kind of damage, but they got her to the ambulance, and eventually the helicopter was there and took her on into Lubbock to the emergency room. My younger daughter's injuries were not as life-threatening, and so they took her by ambulance there. I went over to the car with my wife, and I put my arm around my daughter Ella, and I kissed her on the head, and I said a prayer for her, knowing that that would be the last time I would ever see her again. I'd looked in the ambulance once before the helicopter got there and saw my daughter Aranza laying on the table in there, and there was nobody attending to her, which I thought was odd. At that point, they had her shirt off, though, and as a dad, it didn't seem proper for me to go in there where my daughter didn't have her shirt on. You know, I knew that was the kind of thing that if at any point later in life, if she found out about that, she would have been horribly embarrassed. So I didn't go in there. I wish I had gone in there now and kissed her and held her hand, told her I loved her. But I didn't. So the helicopter took her. The ambulance took my other daughter. We left Ella in the car and we drove to the emergency room in Lubbock, where we went into a waiting room, and they came and after a bit told us that Aranza's damage was extensive, as I knew it was. Multiple fractures in her legs, in the femurs, the thigh bones, and that's where most of the blood in the body gets produced. I've seen lots of carnage. I've been at the scene of lots of traffic accidents and outdoors accidents and things like that. I've seen lots of bad things. But the fact that they were treating her and assessing her damages lit a spark of hope in my mind that made me think that even if they had to amputate her legs, which would have been awful for her, as it would be for anybody, that at least I would still have my daughter. So that guy left and more people showed up. We had called one or two people. You know, it's amazing the social media age, how fast information travels. And before we knew it, there were several of our really close family friends that were there in that waiting room with us. My dad was there at that point too. I had already had to tell my dad that Ella was gone. We sat there for about another 15 or 20 minutes, and I was worried about my other daughter, but I knew that her injuries were not particularly life-threatening. After a bit, the doctor came in. I don't remember her name. And she sat in there with us, and I waited for her to give us an update on what we were about to do, what surgeries were going to have to be performed, what things. And she looked me in the eyes and looked my wife in the eyes, and she said, all right. She said, well, due to the extent of Aranza's injuries and how bad the damage was to her legs, she didn't make it. And I didn't process that at first. It took me a minute to figure out what she just said. I saw my wife go pale, and I heard a friend of ours, the grandfather of the other kids I was telling you about that my kids grew up with, over there in the background. I heard him make a sound and a noise that kind of clued me in to what she had just said, and I realized that now Aranza was gone too, and I had lost two of my daughters. I've replayed that scene in my mind 1,000 times in the last 2 years. The absolute horror of that, and the absolute, it took my breath away. I about hyperventilated. But back in the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't do that. I couldn't fall apart and start grieving and crying at that moment. And that's what this whole series is about grieving. And I couldn't do that right then. For one thing, I knew there were going to be certain duties that had to be done, very unpleasant things. And I also knew I had another daughter. And I regained my composure and became a robot for a minute. I actually became a robot for the next several days. And I gave my wife a hug, and I told her how much I loved her. And I told her I think I need to go be with Sarah and check on her. And she agreed that that was the right thing to do. There was a room full of people there who loved her very much. And I knew I'd see her in a little bit. And so I went to my third daughter, Sarah, and found where she was. Sarah had 9 or 10, 11, I don't remember how many broken bones out of the deal. Some different internal injuries. A seatbelt rash that you can't even imagine. It was like it had been, like the seatbelt had been video printed on her. It was so strong. Her little arm was laying there twisted, kind of looked like an S shape. Her ankle was kind of crooked where it was broken. She had a broken collarbone, a broken vertebrae. I guess she had 2 bones in her wrist broken. I don't even remember what all else now. A rib. I think there was a rib that was... I don't remember all of them at the moment. Sarah asked me, she said, "How are my sisters?" I didn't know how to answer that question. I knew that she probably was aware how her sisters were, and in later weeks and days and months I found out what she saw and knew, and how awful that must have been for her to know that one of her sisters was dead, and to see the other one in the process of dying. It's been nearly 2 years ago, and when I come back to this place here, this is one of the last happy places that we all had, all 3 of my girls and me and my wife. I enjoy being out in the woods, but coming back here is part of the grieving process. I tell you this story not for your sympathy, not for dramatics, simply so that you know there's lots of mosquitoes out here. Now, I tell you this story so that you know when we talk about grief and about grieving, I'm not just making it up. I'm not somebody that studied it. You're never as far out in the woods as you think you are. Car horn honking. I tell you this so that you know it's coming from a place of reality, a place of sincerity, and from experience. This isn't anything I got out of a book. This isn't anything I got off of a video somewhere else. This is something that if you've never experienced grief, then this might be good for you to be able to use to think about in the future some of the things we talk about. If you have experienced grief to whatever degree, then this might be good for you to talk about it, to maybe in the comments here share what you felt, what you know, things that might help other people. Look for answers for things that might help you. That's what we're wanting to do here. We're all wanting to figure out how to deal with this together a little bit. You know, there's lots of aspects to grieving. It's different for everybody. No 2 people deal with it the same. So over the next few videos, I don't even know how fast they'll come out, we'll talk about different things, probably different things that I've dealt with. And if there's things in the comments I saw that are worth passing on, I'll do that too. But I'm just going to share things I've experienced, things that have helped me, things that have made it easier for us to get through it. And we'll learn together, and we'll probably cry together a little bit. If I cry by myself, I don't care if y'all watch me. I'm absolutely not embarrassed to shed tears for my daughters. I don't want to be that kind of guy that's always sad and moaning, and everybody sees me coming and they go, "Oh, brother, here comes Rob. He's going to get all sad on us again." I don't want to be that guy. Except at the same time, I know that all of my friends would be completely okay with that, as they have been. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this story with me. There's a lot more to this whole story. There certainly is. With any luck, this will help me as much as it helps anybody else. Know that whatever you want to share with me, I care. I understand as much as I can. But we'll figure it out together maybe. Thanks.